All right, welcome back to Broncos Country Tonight. Just had a conversation about Garrett Bowles and how it did take a little bit of time for the light to come on for him. What about Drew Lock? You know, we talk about preaching patience with Drew Lock. Can we apply similar ideas of the right coaching, the right amount of time, the right amount of snaps, and maybe the light will come on for Drew Lock? We're seeing some signs that he is progressing, but people are pretty impatient. And I think that sometimes we judge these things as though, well, if he's not Patrick Mahomes, then we need to keep looking for the next quarterback. And I don't think that that's an appropriate conversation actually to have.
Well, it's not. First of all, there's only one Patrick Mahomes anyway, so you'd have 31 other teams ready to jettison their quarterbacks because they don't have Pat Mahomes, and I think that's silly. You don't have to have Patrick Mahomes to win football games. You know, there are other teams that won football games. The Niners made a Super Bowl with Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback. So I think you just need a core competency at the position. Now, can Drew Lock get there? That is the question. I made a comparison to the start, not to the player, but to the start of Josh Allen's career and how that trajectory seems to have, by year 3, panned out with a continuity there. He finally kind of has settled into his own. There are other people that have kind of tailed that comparison. Mike Kliss later on this week did the same thing. But I think that overall, I think that if you're the Denver Broncos, you have to have a plan in place to be willing to stick with it. They had a plan for Garrett Bowles. They were willing to stick with it. They did stick with it, and to their credit, it panned out. You know, all those people that were screaming for tackles, remember, in the last draft.
Well, that's kind of my point. Like, I mean, how many years did we deal with this of like, oh, if they don't address left tackle this year, they're making a huge mistake. You know, how do they continue to let this guy out? I mean, how many fans and media were calling for that dude to get benched? And it feels like we're reliving some of that. Now, I put a similar question up on Twitter, and the reaction was mostly positive of, yeah, that's an interesting point to bring up. You know, you give one guy time that was a heavy investment guy. Why wouldn't you give another? But then a lot of the blowback on it came from, well, these aren't apples to apples conversations. Giving a left tackle extra time versus giving your quarterback extra time shouldn't be the same thing.
Should, actually. That's the thing. They're wrong. And I hate to, I'm sure there are people that, you and I know in media that are saying that that's not a correct comparison, but they're wrong. If you're going to give somebody time, you're giving somebody time. Yes, quarterback is the most important position. Yes, there's going to be a larger spotlight on it than there is going to be, but you have to give each player and each person the appropriate amount of time to get there. With Drew Lock, I think you run it back another year. I think you bring in some competition. You bring in somebody that will move the needle a little bit. They deliberately didn't this offseason because it was going to be Drew Lock's team. I think that, you've got 6 games left, and if Lock plays reasonably well, then I think you run it back with him, and I think you bring in somebody that moves the needle a little bit or puts a little bit of foot on the gas, so that he's got a peek over his shoulder and knows he's got to perform, because that's the other part of this right now. While Drew Lock is upset about his own play, and there's no doubt about that, and while he's been frustrated and all that kind of stuff, he's not looking over his shoulder. He's in no danger of being replaced by any of the people on this roster. And so I think that needs to be something that you have to put in the back of his mind. Hey, look, we appreciate it. It looks like you're finally getting it. We're going to run it back with you. But just in case that doesn't work out, we've got somebody here who can come and take your job. And right now that doesn't exist on this roster.
I'd also like to see Drew Lock do something kind of like our conversation with Garrett Bowles. I'd like to see Drew Lock do something in the offseason to work on his response to negative situations. Like, so with Garrett Bowles, like, he gets booed in the stadium, and that obviously would get to him, and he recognized that. Mm-hmm. And he worked on that in the offseason. Drew, his leadership style, I'm not saying he always has to be upbeat, because it's not always going to call for that. And it's not always going to call for the charismatic version of Drew Lock. But there's also a fine balance to that, because it seems like when he gets kind of going downhill on himself, like you mentioned, he's down on himself in his play right now. He gets going downhill on himself, and the rest of the team kind of follows him down on that. And so that would be one thing. Like, he's going to be working on all the mechanical stuff, and he's going to be working on studying the playbook and becoming a better pro and working on his feet. But the mental side of it, I've seen this year, that's the one thing in growth that I'm hoping we see over the transition to the remainder of the year, is a little bit more growth in that, in the way he mentally handles the job too.
Well, that's the problem with the charismatic leader, though, is as they go, so does the team. And if he's spiraling, that permeates. And so, I mean, I can say that from experience. I like in certain situations in life, you start to spiral a little bit, and you can pull things with you. It happens. So I think that if you are the Broncos, you have to find a way as coaches to build a firewall in there that, hey, if Drew's getting down on himself mentally, and he's going to be hard on himself. In fact, he's going to be harder on himself than media and fans are. He might not externally show that. He might be smiling on the sidelines. but he is going to be harder on himself. And I think that if you're the Broncos coaching staff, you're Pat Shurmur, you're Mike Shula, you've got to build a firewall in there somewhere so that the rest that doesn't permeate the rest of your team and drag the rest of your team down when he's having a bad day.
I want to flip this on the other side, though, because I think there should be an appreciation for it. I'm not saying that the fans, media, and the other players have to feel this way, but I think there should be a little bit of an appreciation for the fact that he cares that much, that he wants it that much. It's been several years of middling quarterback performances and middling quarterback personalities that didn't necessarily want what he wants to be.
And I think that's a part of the appeal of Drew Lock. I think that his personality and his desire to win, I think that resonates. We have had several years of guys who, there's nothing wrong with vanilla ice cream. But Joe Flacco and Case Keenum and Trevor Siemian and Brock Osweiler are, let's be honest, they're vanilla ice cream. Nothing about them inspires you to say, well, we're going to go out and it just doesn't. You're just not those guys. Drew Lock is that guy. But there's a downside to having an emotional leader like that. Is when they're down, they're going to bring you down too. When they pick you up when they're up, but they're going to bring you down a little bit. And so, like I said, that coaching staff, they've got to find a way to firewall that. They've got to find a way to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And even when somebody's having a bad day, it doesn't permeate the entire team.